The main goal of psychology is to explain and understand human behavior and how the human mind works. In recent videos in this series, Introduction to Psychology, I have discussed how thinking can go wrong, leading people to believe in weird things, like the existence of ghosts or paranormal phenomena, or grand conspiracy theories about lizard people controlling human societies, for example. Things that are generally considered weird and wrong by most academic professionals and well-educated, critically, scientifically thinking people in general. In my earlier video series and book, Introduction to Philosophy and Critical Thinking, I already explained what science is, how it works, and why it is superior to all other means of knowledge production. Now, over this and the following 3 videos, I will discuss psychology as a science. I will explain what sort of science it is and what kinds of research is done in psychology. I will also, once again, explain how science works and how it seeks to avoid the problems of ordinary, that is, non-scientific thinking. In all this, I will necessarily repeat some of the things I have already covered previously, but as they say, repetitio est mater studierum. My name is Jouni Vilkka, and this is my channel, TFF Teacher from Finland. Don't forget to subscribe and click the thumbs up button. I will begin by explaining some of the problems with everyday thinking. I will not discuss the logical fallacies and cognitive biases here because I have already covered those in enough detail. See the link in the description for those videos. Instead, I will just briefly mention the general ways in which our normal, unscientific thinking leads us astray. For one, we base too much of our thinking and opinions on our own experiences, what we have heard from our friends and acquaintances, and the general notions common in our culture. On such flimsy grounds, we base our understanding of how people behave and think, and why they do so. This makes our thinking highly subjective and our opinions haphazard. They will be mostly limited to just one point of view, ours. And they will, of course, also be inaccurate, as they are based more on assumptions than observations, experiments, and measurements. We also tend to stick to any explanation we have, no matter how bad it is, because it alleviates our feelings of insecurity caused by uncertainty. By the way, one of the most important things studying philosophy should teach you is to cope with uncertainty. So, maybe you should give it a go and watch my introduction to that subject as well, if you haven't already. In our everyday lives, we also often seek and invent explanations after the fact, a phenomenon called retrofitting. We are very good at noticing patterns, even if they don't actually exist, such as seeing familiar shapes or faces in clouds, a phenomenon called pareidolia. When trying to find an explanation for something, we focus on the first thing that comes to mind, availability heuristic, or the last thing that happened. This last easily leads us to commit the post hoc fallacy. We usually prefer stories, narratives, over statistical data. We, as a species, are notoriously bad at statistical thinking. Stories are powerful in evoking emotions in us, thus perhaps motivating us, but they are also often very misleading. There are conventions to telling stories and what stories are preferred, and we tend to remember things according to such templates or schemas, rather than what actually happened. This often reinforces preconceptions instead of correcting them. It also simplifies things and sometimes focuses on the wrong things from the point of view of someone actually trying to figure out what happened. These are just some of the ways our thinking can go wrong. We are actually rather clever at tricking ourselves. That is why we have invented science. The purpose of science in general is to discover what reality is actually like, to create new knowledge and correct the old. If we can even talk about the tradition of science, it is to go against tradition. This trait it picked up from philosophy. Psychology is a very new science, as it used to be considered part of philosophy until very recently. Exactly when depends on where you look and who you ask. The first psychological laboratories were opened in the latter part of the 19th century. Because science embraces the possibility that even the best current theories, meaning explanations, are incorrect, fallible, it seems fair to say that fallibilism is a core idea of science. It is what makes it possible to examine even the most venerable views in science critically, with an open mind, and that is required for science to advance. Science is a method for improving our knowledge and understanding. It is not merely a body of knowledge. What knowledge there is has to be changeable because sometimes parts of it are shown to be incorrect. Importantly, it is scientists themselves who discover these flaws in the knowledge and even the practices of science and improve them. This is what is meant when science is said to be self-correcting. Of course, non-scientists can also point out problems and suggest improvements because science is public. But in doing so, they have to actually do science, and in any case, other scientists have to check those suggestions. Science is a vast group project, really. The point is that science only accepts the authority of reason and the power of arguments. Political, religious, or economic leaders and organizations are not allowed to have authority in science. That is what the autonomy of science means. Bad science is only corrected by better science, not by the demands of non-scientific institutions. In fact, when they try, and they do try, to influence science, that is when science activism is needed to defend real science against the forces of anti-science. The political situation in a given country can be problematic. For example, science has probably never been more threatened in the US than it is under the Trump administration. Also, the attempts by creationists to push the propaganda in US public schools pale in comparison to how fossil fuel companies have pushed their climate change denialism globally. But one of the coolest things about science is that it is a global project, probably the only truly universal system in the whole world. Even though it rose to prominence in the so-called West, it now involves people from pretty much all countries and ethnicities. Even when political leaders do their best to destroy scientific progress in one country, science still survives in others, at least for as long as free pro-science countries still exist. It is typically dictatorships where science is not allowed to be free and independent because dictators have values completely different from those of science. Yes, science has values. Science is called value-free, but that does not mean that there are no values in science. Rather, it means that other non-scientific values are to have no place in science, and pure science is not affected by such outside influences. That is part of the autonomy of science, but also often brought up separately because it is often misunderstood or intentionally misrepresented. Values in science include objectivity, or rather intersubjectivity, as well as honesty, accuracy, clarity, truthfulness, and so on. All human behavior is directed by values, but values like selfishness, greed, dishonesty, or the pursuit of power over others are against the values of science. It is the pursuit of truth that is central to science, and it means that the best arguments are what matters, not who makes them, or what their social, ethnic, or other background is, or what their position in an organization is, and so on. In that sense, science is democratic, but not in the political sense, because it does not really matter how many people would like something to be true. All that matters is where the best arguments, using the best evidence, lead. That endpoint cannot be chosen in advance, and it does not matter if the truth is unpleasant. It must still be accepted. Because science is such a huge group project with myriad subgroups within it, the consensus of experts, that is, what the large majority of the experts on a given topic agree on, based on the best arguments and evidence, is what counts as scientific truth. But it is not to be confused with the naive understanding of truth, as in science, truth is only provisional, as it is accepted to be fallible, like I already mentioned. Scientific research is being published in many languages, although English has been the dominant language for a while now. But no matter which language is used, scientists use language typically more strictly and accurately than most people are used to. Scientists define the terms they use and seek to make their case as clear as possible. Pseudoscientists typically try to muddle their arguments as much as possible. Sometimes terms used in science end up being used outside of science incorrectly, leading to confusion. For example, terms like fact and theory are misused all the time in ordinary language. When you study a field of science, you will learn that they have a terminology of their own, and that individual scientists will even make their own definitions, and you will learn the importance of definitions. And you will also see how non-scientists abuse language to further their own ends. The way sciences have traditionally been categorized makes it a bit difficult to place psychology within them, because it is not exactly purely a natural science, nor is it purely a human science. Psychology is focused on humans and will only be interested in other animals because studying them may reveal something about humans as well. The methods for studying those other animals, as well as human anatomy and physiology, belong to natural sciences. But then psychology also involves talking to the humans it studies, reading their written accounts, and other methods that require the use of human understanding and belong in the human sciences. Social psychology is even halfway in the category of social sciences, a branch of human sciences including sociology and economics, among others. Much of the psychological research utilizes statistical methods, which belong in the formal sciences, along with formal logic and mathematics. They are called formal because they focus on the form instead of the content of the arguments. This also means that there is no necessary contact with the real world. Logical deduction, for example, is based on merely the forms of sentence structure, not what those sentences are about. Axiomatic systems of mathematics can be created that do not apply to the real world, yet within those systems, mathematicians can happily do their research. This sort of work is sometimes called rationalistic, or more commonly theoretical research, to distinguish it from empirical studies. Psychologists also practice theoretical research when they try to explain the findings of empirical studies by constructing a theoretical model. For example, Freud's famous analysis of the mind as being made up of three aspects, the ego, the id, and the superego, was meant to explain our internal contradictions and find the root of our mental problems. Empirical means based on experience, which can mean either observations or experiments. Thus, history is an empirical study, not a formal or an experimental one, as it is based on sources that can be observed. Similarly, psychologists also use written sources like diaries to learn something about the internal experiences of their subjects that would increase their understanding of the human mind. Psychologists also perform various types of experiments, for example, to find out how different circumstances influence decision making. They may measure reaction times or physiological reactions like the conductivity of skin or how neural activations spread within the brain. Or they could simply analyze the answers the subjects give by filling a form. This brief and abstract overview functions here as an intro to the following videos, where I will describe how psychological research is done, what types of research there are, and how data is collected and analyzed. Bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe, and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.